The clock had just hit 10 when I jumped in my 4WD. The sun was already roasting us through the windshield, shaping up to be a proper scorcher. Coolgardie was 560 clicks west of Perth, a solid 6-hour drive if we hustled, longer with rest stops. As a freelance journalist, I'd snagged an assignment from WA Traveller to write a piece on Coolgardie. The topic sounded intriguing: forgotten Goldfields towns, Coolgardie's nightlife. The editor's idea was to show the modern state of these once booming gold settlements, to find a spark of life where only silence and desolation seemed to reign. Honestly, calling it nightlife was a bloody joke for a town with less than 1,000 people. Coolgardie. The very word echoed a bygone era. 1892 was when the gold rush swept Western Australia, and this dusty patch of earth rode the wave of fortune, drawing prospectors and once boasting a population of 15,000 souls. Bailey's Reward, Wealth of Nations. These names once roared across the country, stirring imaginations with their legendary yields. But the gold vein dried up, and the town gradually emptied, leaving behind only rusted mine scaffolds and dilapidated buildings, silent testaments to its former glory. The first hour flew by unnoticed, to the sound of Arctic monkeys blasting from the speakers. The landscape outside gradually changed. Perth's green suburbs gave way to sun-baked plains, and soon, on both sides of the road, stretched red earth with sparse, stunted scrub clinging to the harsh land. The road wound gently, disappearing towards the horizon, beckoning with its endlessness. About halfway, turning off the highway to an unassuming roadside cafe, I ordered a cold squash and a sandwich. After stretching my legs outside, I was back behind the wheel, lost in thought. The landscape outside remained monotonous, yet there was a raw, rugged beauty in its sameness. Low-lying eucalypts with silvery leaves, reddish wastelands occasionally giving way to rocky ridges. The scorching Western Australian sun mercilessly hammered the roof of my SUV, carrying me deeper into the goldfields. It was here, in this abandoned beauty, that my grandfather, Alfred Reynolds's, story ended. In 1989, he disappeared in a mine. Accident. That was the official verdict, but his body was never found. This unfinished chapter of our family history pulled me here, like a magnet. Fatigue was setting in, but the anticipation of meeting Jake and the desire to see Coolgardie with my own eyes spurred me on. Jacob Mulroney. We grew up together in a boarding school in Perth. Our families were linked by a mining past. Our fathers worked side by side in gold mining, and our grandfathers started there too. But our paths diverged. I went into journalism, and Jake became a bus driver, crisscrossing the golden route between Kalgoorlie, Coolgardie, and Leonora. He's sure to know a lot of local stories and tall tales. I'll be keen to hear them. Finally, after several hours on the road, the Coolgardie sign appeared on the roadside, welcoming, or rather melancholically, into view. Turning off the highway onto the main street, I expected to see a sleepy ghost town. But the street unexpectedly struck me with its scene, wide, with sturdy old buildings on both sides. Their facades breathed past grandeur, and faded signs seemed to tell their own stories. Muffled murmurs of voices drifted from the doors of old pubs, creating the feeling that life in this ancient town was, after all, still going on. The navigation system confidently led me to Jake's house, which stood on the very outskirts of Coolgardie, as if on the border between civilization and the outback. Here began the spacious properties characteristic of the Australian outback. Jake's house was typical for the area, single-story and solid, with a wide veranda inviting refuge from the midday heat. Our well-kept garden spread around it, a bright green oasis sharply contrasting with the red earth stretching beyond. This place seemed like a quiet sanctuary at the edge of the world. I had barely cut the engine when Jake appeared on the veranda. A wide smile lit up his tanned face. "Max, old mate," he called out, coming down the short steps. He shook my hand energetically, gripping my arm with his other. "Good to see you. It's been a while, hasn't it?" "You too, Jake. Thanks for putting me up." Forget the formalities. Come on in, make yourself at home. Fancy a beer? Must have been a long drive." "A bit. The scenery, as always, is impressive in its minimalism," I chuckled. Jake gestured for me to come up onto the veranda. There were wicker chairs and a small table. The evening air was warm and dry, smelling of eucalyptus and some unfamiliar garden flowers. "Sit down, have a rest," Jake offered, pointing to one of the chairs. "I'll grab some cold ones." He disappeared inside and returned a minute later with 2 frosty bottles of 2 Haze Extra Dry beer. Handing one to me, he opened his own. "Well, cheers to meeting up," Jake said, raising his bottle. "To meeting up," I echoed, taking the first sip of the cool beer. After the long drive, it was incredibly welcome. A few sips of beer, and I felt the tension from the long journey start to ease. The evening chill of the outback was just what I needed. "Glad you finally made it out," Jake said, leaning back in his wicker chair. "Always told you should see our neck of the woods." "Yeah, been meaning to for ages," I replied. I jumped at this assignment from WA Traveller, and you know, I always had this thought of finding out more about what happened to Grandad. You remember the story of my granddad, Alfred Reynolds? He disappeared here, in the mine. Jake's face grew serious. "Yeah, Dad mentioned that story. It was before I was born. He said it really shook everyone up." "Exactly. And even though so many years have passed, I've always been curious to see these places." "Listen," Jake perked up. "I know everything around here. I can show you the old mines, tell you all sorts of tall tales. It's a shame, of course, that many areas are now off limits, so we won't be able to film everywhere." "Speaking of filming," I said, remembering my new acquisition, "I bought myself a drone. Haven't quite figured out how it works yet. Shall we give it a try? I'll go get it. Can you help me?" I got up from the chair and headed to the car. I returned with the drone box. Jake, watching with curiosity, said, "All right, show me your new toy." We spent about 20 minutes fiddling around, trying to figure out how to connect the drone. Finally, the camera feed appeared on my tablet screen, and we launched the device into the air. With a soft whir, the drone smoothly lifted off the ground, climbing higher and higher. Dusk was settling, and visibility in the distance was already starting to drop. We smiled and waved at it, watching our house, the garden, and ourselves shrink on the tablet screen. The drone flew over the solitary lamp, illuminating the dirt track in front of the house. Further on, in the gathering darkness, we noticed a flickering light on the neighboring property. "Wonder what's glowing over there," Jake said. Curiosity got the better of me, and I steered the drone towards the light. In the deepening darkness, it was already difficult to film anything else. Soon the outlines of the neighboring territory became clear, a large property stretching back from the road. "Strange," Jake muttered, peering at the screen. "Lloyd left for a mate's place in Kalgoorlie yesterday for a couple of days." As the drone got closer, details became clearer. Behind the house, closer to the shed at the back of the yard, stood an old battered minivan with its headlights on, illuminating the grass. Near the open tailgate, 2 figures were visible, pulling something large wrapped in a black bag and carrying it towards the shed, from which bright light spilled out. "Nobody in town has a car like that. Not a local?" Jake said, frowning. "What are they doing over there?" We circled the drone a bit, trying to get a better look. "Listen," Jake said, "they're unlikely to see the drone in this darkness and at this height, but they might well hear the buzzing. Let's get out of here before we stir up trouble." I agreed, turned the drone back towards our house, and it landed smoothly beside us on the veranda. The last image from the neighboring property was still frozen on the tablet screen. "What's so surprising? Maybe they're family members or relatives, friends visiting." Jacob shook his head. "Nah, no way. I know Lloyd like the back of my hand. He's a loner. No family, no dog, no friends, nobody, just some mysterious friend in Kalgoorlie he sometimes visits. So you figure out who's over there now, making themselves at home." "Well, can't you call him and find out where he is and who these people are?" "Well, actually, I can. Yesterday, when the neighbor was leaving, we had a quick chat, and he said to call if anything came up. But what am I going to say to him? Hey, Lloyd, listen, we were flying a drone over your private property and noticed something strange. You just can't see it from here with the naked eye." Jacob warmed up some simple dinner from frozen meals. We ate, then sat out on the veranda for a bit longer, sipping beer and discussing the next day. Jake didn't have work for the next few days, so he could join me, showing me the local sights during the day and in the evening, taking me to the lively spots so I could get my report done. He said he'd show me everything and tell me everything. For now, I just wanted to sleep. In the morning, after strong coffee and a couple of sandwiches, we set off to explore the surroundings. First, Jacob suggested we see the old Bailey's Reward mine. When we pulled up, the sheer scale of the site hit me. Everywhere I looked, colossal, rusting structures rose up, like the fossilized ribs of ancient beasts jutting out from the red Australian earth. Intertwined metal trusses, remnants of hoisting mechanisms, piles of darkened rock, all spoke of former power, now frozen in silence. Right in front of us, a massive mine pit gaped open. From the cliff edge, you could see how this gigantic hole descended in terraces, as if some colossal spoon had scooped out the earth. I took out my camera and started taking a series of shots, trying to capture this industrial post-apocalyptic scene. After a few frames, I thought that for a complete picture, a bird's-eye view was missing. I pulled out my drone and connected it to the tablet. A live feed from the drone camera appeared on the screen, and in the corner was a small square icon of yesterday's recorded file. I turned to Jacob. "Listen, Jake, what do you think about yesterday? Don't you think it all smells a bit fishy? I wonder what kind of bag they were unloading." "Well, Lloyd, he's a bit of a character, you know. He used to be a doctor at the local hospital. Then he retired or left the profession, I'm not exactly sure. He became a curator at the local museum. That's official, though I think it's more for passion. Besides that, he has an unofficial side hustle, taxidermy. He's been doing it for a long time. Makes all sorts of stuffed animals. They say he's quite talented at it, so it's entirely possible they brought him some kind of critter to work on yesterday. You know, maybe some huge kangaroo or an emu. I don't understand these collectors, how they can keep such gruesome things at home. They reckon he makes a good living from it, but I don't know the details. The neighbor's not a very chatty bloke." "Your neighbor sounds interesting," I whistled. Jacob's explanation sounded quite convincing. I launched the drone. Rising into the air, it offered a completely different perspective of Bailey's Reward. The huge pit seemed even deeper and more imposing from above, revealing terraces of workings like giant steps descending into the earth. From above, a complex labyrinth of old workings and ground collapses opened up, and the remnants of machinery looked like scattered parts of a massive construction set. I was engrossed in capturing these panoramas and individual details, knowing that the aerial shots would make excellent illustrations for my upcoming report. After a few flyovers, I brought the drone back down. "So where to now?" I asked. "Now we'll head to the Tyndall's mining center. There are many mines there, both old and active, and the atmosphere is completely different." A dusty road led us to a vast area dotted with mangled remains of industrial buildings and dark spoil heaps. Unlike the silent grandeur of Bailey's Reward, here there was a strange combination of desolation and ongoing work. In places, fresh tracks from machinery were visible, and on the horizon the buildings of active workshops loomed. "This is the Tyndall's mining center," Jacob said, slowing the car by the roadside. "It's a pretty big place, as you can see." Jacob gestured across the Tyndall's complex, his gaze settling on a section with dilapidated structures and darkened sinkholes, enclosed by rusted fences. "Somewhere in there, Max," he said, nodding towards an overgrown patch of weeds where faint traces of some foundations were barely discernible. "In that area was the entrance to the old cyanide mine. This is where your grandfather died. As far as I know, they were working deep, about 400 meters down. A sudden roof collapse. They were buried. They couldn't save them in time. Something painfully constricted in my chest. To stand right here at the place where my grandfather's life ended. The ground beneath my feet felt alien yet painfully familiar. I wanted to get closer, to examine it, but the rickety metal fences and warning signs clearly indicated no entry. The objects looked too far away to take any meaningful photographs. "All right," I said, trying to hide my emotion. "Then at least we'll launch the drone. We'll get a look at this place from above." At the cyanide mine. The sun beat down mercilessly. Jacob checked his watch. "Listen, it's already lunchtime. Time to head back to town and grab a bite. And after that, we can pop into the museum. How does that sound?" I nodded, folding up the drone. We drove along the deserted streets of Coolgardie. The houses had peeling paint, and on some doors, faded 19th century signs were still visible. "By the way, see the Denver City Hotel?" Jacob said, pointing to an old building. It's the oldest hotel in the Goldfields region, been operating since 1895. The atmosphere from the gold rush days is still preserved inside. That's where we'll go tonight for your report. It's probably the only place in town with any nightlife. And here's the museum, he added as we drove past a large building. Jacob parked the car at a small cafe, Way Out West Cafe. The parking lot was packed, and peeking inside, we saw there were hardly any free tables. Looks like a popular spot, I noted. Of course it's popular, it's the only place to get lunch, Jacob laughed. These are all non-locals, tourists and passers-by. Inside it was cool, noisy and crowded. We didn't see any free tables, so we went out into a small garden where there were shaded spots under an awning. We ordered burgers, chips and cold squash. Jacob was a good storyteller. He knew everything, and a bit more about these places. I listened to him, imagining what life was like here before and what it's like now. After lunch, we headed to the Coolgardie Visitors Centre and Goldfields Exhibition Museum. The museum turned out to be huge, with high ceilings and large windows. The exhibition was truly impressive. There was everything imaginable here, but I was quite tired, and after a tasty lunch, I felt like a nap. I'm not a big fan of museums, so we decided to quickly breeze through the halls. Inside, the atmosphere of the past reigned. The rooms held old display cases with exhibits from the gold rush era, photographs, mine models, antique equipment, and even a pharmacy collection. The collection of waghorn bottles was especially impressive. Here and there among the exhibits were stuffed local animals. "Ah, these are my neighbor's works," Jacob said. "He runs the show here." I whistled. Wow, they look so lifelike. There were also mannequins of people from that era depicting daily activities. Interesting. Does your neighbor make these living dioramas too? I joked, looking at them. We returned home and settled on the shaded veranda, where a ceiling fan lazily spun. After the scorching walk, a bottle of ice-cold beer felt great going down. I was reviewing the footage. Yesterday's recording from the neighbor's property caused an inexplicable unease. "Listen, how about I launch this thing again? I'm itching to get another look at your neighbor's property." Jacob nodded with a smile. "Yeah, no worries, Max. Have fun. From the looks of it, Lloyd isn't back from Kalgoorlie yet. Otherwise, we would have caught him at the museum. He's usually there at this time." I took out the drone and inserted a fresh battery. A faint whir and it was airborne, soaring over the wooden fence. The drone glided smoothly over the red dirt road, approaching Lloyd's extensive property. From above, a view unfolded. The corrugated iron roof of a large single-story house gleamed under the daytime sun. The house itself was substantial and occupied only a fraction of this enormous plot. A wide yard, overgrown with scorched grass, stretched around it, with sparse patches of eucalyptus and, it seemed, lemon trees. The overall impression was one of a certain disrepair. Here and there, some planks and old tools, old sheets of metal, and other indeterminate junk lay scattered. At the far end of the property, an imposing metal-clad hangar rose. An old pickup truck stood nearby, covered in a thick layer of red dust. The hangar doors were tightly closed. I flew the drone around the building to the other side and saw large gates. Judging by their width and height, large machinery could drive through them, perhaps a tractor or even a truck. These gates were open, and I was immediately overcome with curiosity. I steered the drone inside the dark hangar. As soon as the drone crossed the hangar threshold, the image on the tablet momentarily darkened, as if the camera blinded, transitioning from bright daylight to deep shadow. Then the picture restored, becoming grainier, with enhanced brightness, trying to discern details in the gloom. Perhaps some night vision mode automatically activated. To the right, in the dim light of the hangar, stood a pickup truck. To the left, some clutter was piled up, construction equipment and repair tools, but it was hard to make out exactly in the semi-darkness. Overall, this part of the hangar looked like a garage or workshop. I directed the drone a little deeper into the dark space and saw long shelves. Who wasn't here? The shelves were crammed with taxidermied animals, a kangaroo frozen mid-leap, a pair of majestic emus with long necks, a red fox, a dingo seemingly looking around cautiously, many brightly colored parrots perched on a branch, a small spiky echidna, a cozily curled-up koala, a stocky wombat, as well as a terrifying-looking crocodile with an open maw, several coiled snakes, and even a smiling quokka. Along the right wall, long, massive metal tables stretched. Their surfaces were a creative mess. All sorts of tools, scalpels, clamps, needles of various thicknesses, brushes, lay intermingled with microscopes, various bottles, and measuring cups containing unclear concoctions. Here and there, tufts of fur and feathers were visible. On the walls above the tables were shelves stacked with jars and bottles with labels. From the ceiling above each table hung several large fluorescent lamps. Everything indicated that these were the taxidermist's workstations. I flew further, and the suddenly revealed scene made me flinch. I instinctively recoiled from the tablet. There were several people on the screen. The initial shock passed, and I realized they weren't moving. My hands were still trembling as I carefully brought the drone closer. A man in worn work clothes stood with his head bowed, as if deep in thought. Nearby, in an old wooden armchair, sat another, his gaze fixed to the side, an open book resting on his lap. A little further off stood two more men. One leaned against some sort of stand, the other, in an elegant suit from the last century, smoked a pipe. I breathed a sigh of relief. These were wax figures. Further along the right wall, two huge boxes rose, approximately 3 by 3 meters each, with thick metal doors equipped with airtight locks. Ventilation grills and possibly temperature sensors were visible on the doors. Such structures are typically found in meat processing plants, grocery stores and large restaurant kitchens. I assumed that Lloyd stored animal carcasses in these cold rooms, awaiting their turn to be transformed into taxidermy. There was nowhere further to fly. The hangar ended. I saw the door through which people had brought something in a black bag yesterday. They likely used that one, as it was located near the cold rooms. I turned the drone, intending to fly out of the hangar. At that moment, Jacob approached me. While I had been examining Lloyd's property, he had been taking a shower. He looked over my shoulder and with a smirk asked, "Well, Sherlock, dig up anything interesting? Satisfy your curiosity?" I smirked back at Jacob. "Oh yeah, quite a lot actually. Your neighbor's a serious character." Meanwhile, the drone was already approaching the huge hangar doors from which bright sunlight streamed. "Hold on, stop," Jacob suddenly said. "Go back, show me the car." I immediately turned the drone to inspect the pickup truck. "Holy shit," Jacob blurted out. "That's Lloyd's car. He's home. Get out of there immediately. If he finds us here, it'll be bad." I steered the drone towards the hangar exit. "Fly in the opposite direction from the house," Jacob commanded. I raised the drone to its maximum height and directed it towards the property line. As soon as it flew beyond the neighbor's premises, we saw a man exit the house and head straight for the hangar. Yeah, we got out in time. Another couple of minutes, if the drone got stuck inside, trouble would have been unavoidable. Adrenaline was still surging through my veins. Jacob, shaking his head agitatedly, said, "We shouldn't have done this at all, Max. We had no right to fly over private property. It's illegal and dangerous." "You're right," I agreed. "We shouldn't have done it, but listen, you really need to see what your neighbor is up to. He has an impressive taxidermy workshop with huge cold rooms. Can selling stuffed animals really bring in that much money? Quite a profitable hobby, don't you think?" Jacob carefully watched the recording and whistled. "This looks like industrial scale. I didn't even know it paid so well here in this country. Maybe he's even supplying abroad. People from other corners of the planet are probably willing to pay for a taxidermied kangaroo. Honestly, I never thought about it. But looking at all this, I now believe that there's a reason they say he flies under the radar and is quite the dark horse." It was just after 3 in the afternoon, and the sun, having traversed the sky, now mercilessly blazed onto the veranda. The scorching heat and stifling air became unbearable, forcing us to abandon the scorching space. We hurried into the cool solace of the bedrooms, where air conditioners hummed like rescue beacons in a desert of heat. I took a shower, washing off the sticky film of the day, and collapsed onto the bed, immersing myself in the flickering screen of my phone. As the early Australian night began to gather outside, Jacob knocked on the door. "Well, reporter, ready for a romp through our swanky hotspots?" "Always ready. Let's go," I replied. We stepped out of the house. Above us, the black sky stretched, dusted with a myriad of stars. Such a Milky Way can only be seen in the Australian outback. We hopped into the car and headed towards the center of Coolgardie. 10 minutes later, We were parking near the Denver City Hotel. "Well, welcome to our nightlife, Jem," Jacob chuckled, turning off the ignition. I surveyed the old two-story Federation-style corner building with its facades facing two streets at a wide intersection. It clearly stood here since the century before last. Its faded yellow walls looked dilapidated in places. A wide veranda ran along the first floor, and rusted metal supports held up the second-floor balcony, along which a large sign with faded paints, Denver City Hotel, stretched, wrapping around the corner of the building. Overall, everything looked sad. Apparently, no one had invested money in this building for a long time. We went inside. The wooden floors creaked slightly underfoot. The atmosphere of a typical Australian pub enveloped us immediately. Subdued light, the heavy scent of old wood mixed with the appetizing aroma of fried onions and the malty tang of beer. A long, dark wooden bar counter beckoned with high stools. Old photographs in yellowed frames and vintage beer posters hung on the walls. In the corner stood a pool table, illuminated by a hanging lamp. A large, flat-screen TV on the wall broadcast a lively Australian rules football match. The bar was crowded, and all this cacophony, laughter, animated conversations, where everyone tried to outshout their neighbor over the loud broadcast and 80s music, created an atmosphere that made me want to flee. We walked through and sat down at the sticky bar counter. Jacob called to the bartender, "Hey Harry, 2 beers for me and my old mate from the city, please." A large man in his 50s with rolled-up shirt sleeves and a good-natured face slowly approached us. He extended his hand to Jacob. "Good to see you, Jake. Swan as usual for you?" Jacob nodded. The bartender shifted his gaze to me and smiled. "And this, I presume, is your friend from Perth. Max, right? Jake told me about you. Nice to meet you." He extended his hand to me and I shook it. "You too, Harry," I replied. Harry placed 2 frosty mugs of draft Swan in front of us. Harry, pouring himself a mug of beer as well, clinked glasses with us, and we drank to our acquaintance. A woman in an apron, roughly the same age as Harry, with a welcoming smile, approached us. "Hi, Jake. And who's this with you?" she asked. "Liz, meet Max, my old friend from Perth," Jacob introduced. "Max, this is Liz, Harry's wife. They own this hotel." "How's the big smoke?" Liz asked me. "And what brings you all the way out to this backwater, Max?" "I'm a reporter, and I'm on assignment for an agency to do a story about nightlife in Coolgardie," I explained. Harry, Jacob, and Liz burst out laughing. "Well, mate, you've come to the right place then," Harry managed through his laughter, glancing around the establishment. "This is our entire nightlife, our whole entertainment program in one go." "Yeah, I've already figured out what nightlife means here," I chuckled in response to their laughter. "Well, no matter, since I'm here I need to write the report. Listen, can I shoot a bit first? The interior, the atmosphere, and then I'll need to talk to some locals, get a couple of short interviews. And you two wouldn't hurt either. Maybe you can tell me something interesting? How do you all live here? Do you celebrate anything? Are there any local concerts, events, festivals?" Harry chuckled. "Well, in Coolgardie itself, you're unlikely to find anything interesting in your sense of the word. If any of our locals want nightlife, they all head to Kalgoorlie on weekends. It's a bigger town there, and there are plenty of places, a cinema and even a couple of nightclubs. Otherwise, if you're talking about our district, along the main highway there are a few caravan parks. Sometimes they have small concerts there, some local bands play. They also organize various parties there, but that's all pretty local stuff." I nodded, took out my voice recorder, and clipped a small microphone to Harry's shirt lapel. "Then tell me a little about this place," I requested. Harry turned down the music and turned off the TV sound. "Well, what's there to tell, mate?" he began. "The Denver City Hotel, you could say it's a legend. Once life was booming here. Back in the gold rush days, this hotel was the heart of everything. The hotel burned down a few times and was rebuilt. These walls have seen so much. There were arguments here over a handful of gold. Yeah, gambling was always big here. Over at that pool table," he nodded to the corner, "many a fortune was lost and won. Poker, blackjack. People used to lose whole mining claims in one night. The stakes were crazy. And also dice, heard the dice rattling? Well, here that sound was music. And they even had a piano here. A local bloke would play it for everyone. They even had little mini variety shows sometimes. People, like always, found ways to entertain themselves with strong drink after hard work days. Dancing, arguments, fights, all as it should be in a big gold mining town. And we even have our own ghost, lives in the back room upstairs. Harry burst out laughing. They even made a movie about us called Hotel Coolgardie. There's a lot of fiction in it, of course, but the atmosphere of our bar, where anything could happen, is captured well. Now, of course, it's not the same scale. The town's shrunk, and most of the folks who stayed don't look for trouble. Everything's peaceful, no squabbles, unless someone's just yelling their head off for their team. Harry nodded at the TV. I looked at the screen. It was news, and in the ticker tape below the reporter, it said, Kalgoorlie. Harry noticed it too, and turned up the volume. Silence fell in the room, and all eyes turned to the screen. The local police superintendent was speaking. Kalgoorlie police are looking for 2 tourists, known bloggers from Melbourne, the superintendent was saying. They were last seen 2 days ago, on Friday night into Saturday at the Gold Bar nightclub. They came to our region to film content for their blogs about these areas. If you have any information about these individuals, have seen them in recent days, or know of their possible whereabouts, please contact Kalgoorlie police immediately at the phone number you see on the screen. Any information, even seemingly insignificant, could be useful for the investigation. We ask all residents and visitors to be vigilant and help us locate the missing persons. At the bottom of the screen, the phone number for the Kalgoorlie police station scrolled. The bar buzzed after the news. "Max, there's your nightlife," Harry grumbled. "I know those kids. They stayed with us for one night. Nice couple they were, but they didn't like it here. It was too boring for them. They were also expecting some nightlife, but as you can see, we've got old folks gatherings here, not what young people from Melbourne are after. I hope they just got high somewhere and are sleeping now. Though, you know, probably not. They're not the first tourists to go missing on our Golden Mile. It's always been like that here. Miners disappeared without a trace, and locals too. Now mostly it's just tourists who vanish." The news of the missing bloggers shocked me. "Where do they disappear to?" I asked. "Have any been found? My granddad disappeared here in '89 too. They said there was a cave-in at the mine, but his body was never found. Listed as missing, buried alive." "I feel for you, mate," Harry sighed. "But you know, anything could happen in these mines. Cave-ins, floods, and sometimes miners just vanished, and you'd never find a trace. So yeah, it's all murky. Now there are whispers that tourists are being kidnapped to sell their organs, and there are also rumors going around that some maniac has set up shop in the area. You remember the Snowtown story, right? I can't say anything for sure. It's sad, of course, but it's all just rumors and folk speculation. No one knows for sure. I don't want to believe gossip, and I wouldn't advise you to either." Harry's words made me wary. The image from earlier today immediately flashed in my mind. Lloyd's strange hangar and those eerie industrial refrigerators inside. A nasty premonition pricked me. The atmosphere in the bar noticeably deflated. The fun was gone in an instant. Patrons were now mostly discussing the news. Someone remembered seeing them a couple of days ago, right there in the hotel. They whispered about gangs operating in the area, about maniacs. They counted the disappeared over the past years, recalling their names and who they were. All these conversations created a heavy mood. My desire to do the report right now vanished. I decided to postpone filming until tomorrow. Tonight, I just wanted to go home as soon as possible. I wanted to talk about all this with Jake, to discuss the situation. My journalist's gut feeling was telling me that the answer to something important might be somewhere close. We finished our beers, said goodbye to Harry and Liz, and stepped outside. It had gotten noticeably colder. In such places in the outback, there's usually a large difference between day and night temperatures. It's hot as hell here during the day, but at night in the desert it can get very cold. As we drove home, I asked Jake what he thought about all this. Jake shrugged. "No definite thoughts," he said. "But now I'm constantly thinking about what we saw in Lloyd's garage too, and it all seems suspicious and unsettling to me as well." "And who can we even ask about this museum curator? Who knows him well?" I inquired of Jake. Jake thought for a moment. "As I told you, he's a reclusive bloke. With tourists at work, he's very friendly and talkative, does his museum job perfectly. But in his personal life, he doesn't really socialize with any of the locals. He doesn't even drop into the Denver city like all the other locals to have a beer on weekends. I told you, he has some friend in Kalgoorlie he sometimes visits. Who he is and what he does, nobody here knows, and nobody really pries into others' business. If someone doesn't want to socialize, no one here is going to force their friendship on them. Hold on, Jake, but you told me he used to be a doctor at the local hospital. I assume everyone knows everyone in this town. Surely his former colleagues are still around, people who worked with him and know him. It can't be that no one knows anything about a person in such a small town. You're right. There are colleagues and people who know him. He's polite to everyone, but conversations never go beyond surface level. He doesn't let anyone get close. He's always been a loner, no family, no kids, and no one really pushed to be his mate. Yeah, some suspicious character. A good candidate for a maniac, I said. Listen, how about we drive out to my folks' place tomorrow? Jake suggested. They'd be stoked to see you. Dad's lived next door to Lloyd his whole life. He and Mum moved to Kangaroo Hills Timber Reserve 5 years ago. They wanted to live in peace and quiet in retirement, in a green, beautiful, peaceful place like that. And I stayed in the family home. I reckon Dad might have something to tell us about our suspect. Absolutely, I'd love to see your parents. It'll be really interesting to hear what your dad can tell us about Lloyd. I couldn't sleep for half the night. Again and again I rewatched the footage from Lloyd's hangar, trying to make out details. I searched the internet for information on disappearances in this region over recent years. In the morning, we had a cup of strong coffee. Jake called his parents and told them we'd be visiting soon. We drove out of Coolgardie. The landscape outside was initially familiar. Red earth, sparse, sun-baked bushes. But the further we drove, turning off the main highway onto Nepean Road, the more noticeable the changes became. Among the red earth, the first eucalyptus trees began to appear, growing more numerous as we progressed, their characteristic aroma filling the air. Low, rocky hills, now covered in denser greenery, flashed by on the sides. The road wound through these emerging forests, and about 15 minutes later, we drove into the Kangaroo Hills Timber Reserve. We pulled up to a small, cozy house nestled in greenery, a single-story building with a veranda draped in bright bougainvillea. Jake's parents were already waiting for us on the porch. His father, Samuel, was a sturdy man with kind wrinkles around his eyes. He loudly greeted us and gave me a firm hug. Jake's mother, Cynthia, happily embraced and kissed me. "Max dear, how wonderful to see you. How much you've grown. The last time we saw you, you were just a teenager," Jake's mother said warmly. We settled on the veranda at a large wooden table. Cynthia had prepared a substantial breakfast, and we happily reminisced about old times. They asked me about my life, about my parents, though they often call each other anyway. They wanted to hear the news directly from me. It was fun and heartwarming. Silence reigned all around, only birds disturbed it with their chirping. A true paradise, an oasis in the middle of the desert. After a while, Cynthia left us, saying she needed to go to Coolgardie for her weekly gardening club meeting. "Dad, did you see yesterday's news about the missing tourists in Kalgoorlie?" Jake asked his father. He shook his head. "No, I didn't watch. What's up?" "Well, Max and I have some suspicions that our neighbor Lloyd might be involved. What do you say?" Sam was very surprised and asked, "Oh, what are your suspicions based on?" We showed him the footage from Lloyd's garage. He watched the recording carefully. His face grew serious. "Boys," Sam said, putting down the tablet, "don't you get involved in this. You could get yourselves into deep trouble." "Dad, you know something about Lloyd. I can see it. You're holding something back. Come on, tell us. Why shouldn't we get involved? And what kind of trouble could we get into?" Sam sighed, glancing over his glasses and looking into the distance as if recalling past events. "You see, boys, Lloyd once had a very close friend, David, since childhood. They were inseparable, like brothers. David, like me, worked as a miner, and we often went down the same shaft. And Lloyd, he was different. His parents were well off and were able to send him to school in England, where he studied to be a surgeon for several years. A brilliant future awaited him in any city on this planet, but he came back here to our backwater, to Coolgardie, most likely for David's sake. David had a little boy, Mark, whom he raised alone. His wife left him. They used to say it was because of David's overly close friendship with Lloyd. Rumors circulated that their bond was more than just friendship. You know, back then, men and morals here were harsh, especially in the mining community. So such things were looked upon unfavorably. Lloyd never had children of his own, and he loved Mark like his own son. So here's the thing, and when Mark was just 18, hot-blooded and had a bit too much to drink, he got into some drunken brawl, out of foolishness, out of youth, and it turned out he hit someone to death. Lloyd then helped him cover it up. I don't know what he did. Maybe he buried the body somewhere in the red sands, but Mark got away with it. No one ever found out. About 3 years later, David wasted away from cancer, so Lloyd became like family to Mark, replaced his father. Mark went into the police force and moved to Kalgoorlie. He never married, by the way, no kids either. He rose through the ranks to superintendent, so if you guys are right about Lloyd, you'd be up shit creek without a paddle. If the top cop himself is involved, there could be connections we couldn't even dream of. All that's left is to guess what's on their minds and who's covering for whom. And how do I know all this? Sam smirked wryly, as if recalling something unpleasant. I remember Lloyd started drinking heavily after David's death. He couldn't handle it, took to the bottle, and that led to a fatal medical error. A person died on his operating table. The matter was successfully covered up, but he was politely asked to leave the profession. After that, Lloyd completely retreated into himself, became withdrawn. He doesn't really socialize with anyone, rather he avoids everyone. He's become a true sociophobe, doesn't let anyone close. That's the murky story for you. And his last name is Craven, Jake whistled. Yesterday, the police officer speaking on the news was Mark Craven. He made an impression as a serious man. He asked everyone with any information about the missing persons to contact the police. That's interesting. That's right, son. The superintendent of Kalgoorlie Police himself, Mark Jason Craven, our neighbor Lloyd's adopted son. So, Lloyd isn't visiting some ghostly friend, but his very real adopted son. Jake's voice held a note of elation that instantly turned to icy horror. What kind of business have they cooked up? This damn surgeon and his son, the chief of police? And is Lloyd really just dabbling in taxidermy? What were those creepy black bags we saw being offloaded into his hangar? And those strange figures? Are they really just wax? God. And all those rumors about black market organ trafficking. The conversation with Jake's father brought some clarity, but now there were exponentially more questions than answers. The information I'd heard revealed unexpected connections. Lloyd, a former surgeon, and Mark, a police superintendent. Their relationship and potential involvement in the disappearances created a picture that demanded immediate analysis. We were driving back to Coolgardie. The sky overhead was dazzlingly blue, the sun directly overhead relentlessly blazing. What now? Jake asked. I'll try to contact my colleagues here and abroad. I need to find out who knows what about the black market for organs and possibly about human exhibits. Ugh. I can't believe that could be true. I also have people I can discuss these delicate matters with, Jake said. I'll go through those who usually keep quiet but know something. The rest of the day I spent on calls with my journalist colleagues around the world, with whom I collaborated as a freelance correspondent for many publications. I needed to find out about illegal collections of human exhibits or taxidermy, as well as any information related to black market organ trafficking, both in Australia and beyond. Jake, meanwhile, was investigating through his own channels. By evening, information started coming in. Most of it concerned general knowledge about the black market for organs. It exists, and the prices are exorbitant. Nothing new. However, several sources sent something more specific. They confirmed the existence of an extremely specific and secret market for so-called dark art, exhibits made from human bodies. This wasn't a mass market, but custom pieces for particularly depraved and wealthy collectors. The cost of such works was insane, surpassing even the prices of the rarest gems. The demand for such collections had significantly increased in recent years, especially from closed elite circles in Europe, Asia, and North America. The talk was of buyers from London, Hong Kong, New York, Geneva, those willing to pay millions. These works were sold at strictly closed underground auctions, accessible to only a select few. For these collectors, it wasn't just possession, but prestige and a demonstration of absolute power over human life and death, an opportunity to own something beyond morality and law. There were even mentions of links to occult circles, adherents of the Illuminati, Masonic lodges and other secret societies whose tentacles, according to persistent rumors, extended all the way to Hollywood and the highest echelons of power. For them, these exhibits served not only as a symbol of status, but also as artifacts in satanic rites and rituals, parts of which, according to persistent rumors, even included elements like Pizzagate and other perverted practices known only to the chosen ones. This also intertwined with information about closed parties on private islands and hotels, where modern sexual slavery thrived and where these collections could serve as a backdrop for further, even more revolting entertainment for those who no longer knew how else to satiate their perverted nature. Jake returned around 7 in the evening. We settled on the veranda with cold beer, exchanging the information we had gathered. After I shared my findings, it was Jake's turn. I was in Boulder. There's a retired cop living there, a complete junkie, hooked on the needle, a local town crazy. But I knew he was worth a visit. So this guy, his name's Roy, even though he's constantly high, his memory, it turns out, is excellent. Probably no one listens to him. That's why he's still alive. He worked directly under Mark. Once, in a group with 2 other police officers, they used the plausible excuse of giving a drunk tourist a ride to his hotel, but instead, they took him here, to Coolgardie, to some abandoned mine. Some bloke was already waiting for them there. According to Roy, they led the poor guy through labyrinths to some kind of operating room and left him there. They quickly cleared out, and he was too scared to ask his senior colleagues. He was paid well then and got promoted. This happened a couple more times. The special operations, as he put it, came directly from Mark Craven, always with good pay. But our Roy quickly caught on to what was going on and got hooked on drugs. He realized people were disappearing, and he was neck deep in it. He couldn't just quit because he knew what awaited him in that scenario. So he gradually brought himself to a state where the police couldn't keep him anymore. The mine where they took the kidnapped tourists is the Tyndall's mining center, and according to him, everything inside was more sophisticated than in any hospital. Roy revealed another important thing. Mark not only organized the disappearances of people, but also controlled drug trafficking. Another colleague of his, who worked in a different unit and reported directly to Mark, was involved in this. Now, like Roy, he's hooked on the needle and knows perfectly well that this entire business is under Mark's direction. The dealer Roy gets his drugs from operates under his protection, as do all drug traffickers in this region. This former cop, named Vince, lives in Leonora. He was kicked off the police force. Roy said that if I was interested, I could visit him. He gave me his address, although he and Vince were never friends, only crossed paths at work. But Roy is sure. Vince can also tell us some interesting things about Mark. Furthermore, Roy mentioned other agents of Mark's privy to many of his dealings, the owners of the Denver City Hotel, Harry and Liz. We need to be extremely careful with them, as they work directly for Mark. They are the spotters, the initial link in his schemes, and they absolutely cannot be trusted. Jake's story, especially Roy's latest revelations about Harry and Liz, literally stunned me. The information hit home directly, exposing an abyss I hadn't even suspected. Until this moment, everything seemed distant, foreign, but now these connections became frighteningly real. Jake was also shocked. For him, this was also a complete surprise. And yet tonight, we were slated to go back to the Denver City Hotel. I needed to finish my report, and now this visit had taken on an entirely different, sinister overtone. Every one of their words, every glance, every movement would now be perceived differently. The hotel, which until recently seemed like an ordinary backwater establishment, now appeared as a spider's nest where the owners wove their deadly web. When we entered the bar, we were enveloped by the peaceful, lively, and loud voice of the province. But this time I saw everything differently. Every face, every gesture seemed suspicious, and the cheerful hum, a thin veil. Harry stood behind the bar, wiping glasses. Seeing us, he smiled broadly. His eyes glided over me, lingering for a fraction of a second longer than ordinary politeness allowed. "Mates, good to see you." His voice sounded as if he genuinely was glad to see us, but I caught a hint of falseness in it. "So, is your report on our wild nightlife ready?" Liz approached almost immediately, her smile as welcoming as Harry's. She hugged Jake and lightly touched my shoulder. and I felt her gaze studying me. "Hi boys, glad to see you." We ordered beer, trying to look relaxed. The atmosphere hadn't changed, but our perception had. Yesterday, everything just seemed like a friendly provincial bar. Today, I saw a potential trap in every corner and a hidden motive in every friendly word. I took a series of photographs, general shots of the bar, the faces of the patrons, their laughter. All of it I captured with my lens. Then I began to ask who I could get a short interview from. During each such interview, I would sit down at a table or stand among the mates. All the while, Liz was constantly circling around. Sometimes she was clearing empty beer bottles, sometimes wiping sticky tables, sometimes just exchanging jokes with patrons, hugging some of them. One way or another, she was always nearby, clearly eavesdropping. I didn't want to linger in the bar for long, and honestly, there was no need. I had already managed to gather everything required for the report. We finished a couple more beers with Harry, and I told him that tomorrow we planned to go to Kalgoorlie, as it seemed there was truly nothing left for us here. Harry and Liz nodded, fully agreeing with us, and their faces maintained their usual good-naturedness. We said warm goodbyes and left the bar, finding ourselves under the starry Australian sky. We spent the rest of the evening discussing the situation. We sifted through the facts, trying to figure out where to go next. Answers eluded us. "After this kind of information, it's dangerous to trust anyone local," Jake said. "We need to tell Dad everything, ask for his advice. He worked at the Tyndall's gold mine after all. Maybe he can tell us exactly where this lab might be hidden." While Jake called his father and talked with him, I reviewed the messages that kept coming in from my colleagues around the world regarding our case. Each new notification was like a subtle prick, reminding me of the scale of what we had gotten ourselves into. Jacob finished his call and explained the following. Dad said he has an old friend, Harold. Harold's son, Dan, was Mark's classmate. He works in the Serious and Organised Crime Squad in Perth, and once Mark seriously crossed him. You could say they're sworn enemies now. Their feud goes back to their youth, when Dan and Mark were inseparable friends and classmates. Dan had a girlfriend, Mari, whom he was going to marry. Their love, which had started in school, seemed mutual, but Mark interfered. He stole Mari from Dan, cruelly betraying him. He used her and dumped her, and after some time she wanted to go back to Dan, but he couldn't get over such a double betrayal, from his best friend and his beloved. For him it was his first great love, and the emotional wound was too deep. Dan couldn't take it and moved away to the capital. Now he's quite a successful family man. He has 3 children, and he's happily married. But he still can't forgive Mark. My old man thinks Dan might be interested in this case. Regarding information on where the presumed lab might be, Dad doesn't know, Jake said. Tyndall's is too vast. There are so many underground mines there that finding a specific spot is like looking for a needle in a haystack. He promised that tomorrow morning he would call Harold. According to him, he's an old school bloke, a former miner, a decent guy. Dad is going to tell him everything we've learned. Perhaps Harold can help connect you with his son. If Dan shows interest in this case, then you'll have an opportunity to unravel this tangle. Otherwise, boys, I don't think you'll manage without the support of forces and resources like Dan's. Early in the morning, as we sat on the veranda having a simple breakfast, Jake's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was Dan. He said he had just spoken with his father and was very interested in the story and information we possessed. Dan wanted to meet us in person. He emphasized that it wasn't a phone conversation, and the situation needed to be discussed only face-to-face. I started packing for the trip. My assignment wasn't time-limited. I only had to submit the task in 2 weeks. That was the beauty of freelancing, which offered such freedom of action. Jake wanted to come with me. He hadn't been to Perth in ages and clearly missed the capital. But work held him back. He had tours planned for today and tomorrow, and he couldn't abandon his tourists. We decided to play it by ear. After talking with Dan, it would become clear where to dig further, and then we would adjust our plans. I arrived in Perth around 3 in the afternoon. The drive was exhausting, but the circumstances kept me on edge. After a long journey, the city greeted me with a hustle and bustle unfamiliar to the outback and a fresh sea breeze. I called Dan, and we arranged to meet at Kings Park and Botanic Garden in the Perth CBD area. He suggested meeting at the lookout point, which offered views of the Swan River. There we could talk without fear of eavesdropping. At the appointed time, I went up to the lookout. Dan was already waiting. He was a solidly built man in his early 40s with light, closely cropped hair and perceptive grey eyes. His gaze revealed years of experience working in special police. I recognized him immediately. Besides us, there were a couple of other tourists, and we didn't particularly stand out. I introduced myself, explained who I was and why I was there. Dan listened attentively, his expression unperturbed. When I finished, he nodded curtly. "All right," he said. "What exactly did you find?" I took out my tablet and opened the drone footage. Dan leaned over the screen, his gaze hardening. He silently and carefully reviewed the images, examining every detail. We talked for about 40 minutes. During that time, I laid out all the available information to Dan. I expressed my conviction that my journalistic gut feeling pointed to a major scandal, and I intended to get to the bottom of it. I made it clear that I would be glad if Dan, as an officer of the Serious and Organized Crime Squad, helped me. If not, I would still continue to pursue this matter, and as a journalist would cover it no matter what. Dan pulled a burner phone from his pocket and handed it to me. He said he would take on the case, but no steps should be taken until he called. My information pointed to a large international criminal syndicate. The seriousness of the situation was evident, and he was concerned about my safety. 4 days passed. There was no word from Dan. I was working in Perth, calling Jake daily. Nothing much had happened during this time, except for one thing. Jake had visited Vince in Leonora and learned some information. Vince revealed to Jake the details of Mark's drug network. High-quality MDMA and cocaine arrived via air transport at Kalgoorlie Boulder Airport from all major cities. They were picked up under the guise of packages and taken to a base in Tyndalls. The main volume of methamphetamine ice came by land on heavy-duty trucks from Adelaide and Melbourne via the Great Eastern Highway, hidden in secret compartments among mining equipment or spare parts. Upon arriving at warehouses in West Kalgoorlie, it was also sent to the base in Tyndalls. Marijuana and synthetic drugs arrived through regular logistics channels. They were integrated into pallets with food and household goods from distribution centres in Perth directly to retail outlets in Kalgoorlie. Vince, still young but already broken by life, a complete drug addict, knew all the ins and outs, as he himself had once been part of the police staff responsible for the drug supply direction. There was no competition in the region. Any drug, regardless of type, was under Mark's control. No one else could enter this market, and any alternative was brutally suppressed at the root. Vince made it clear he didn't care what Mark would do to him. His younger brother Troy had gotten hooked on ice a few years ago, the same stuff Mark was poisoning all the youth with. Troy tried to quit, but the system didn't let go. Vince found him dead from an overdose. Since then, Vince has deeply wished that Mark would go to hell. The burner phone finally came to life. Dan arranged a meeting at an outdoor cafe in Perth city centre near Elizabeth Quay. We met. The case, as Dan informed me, was far more serious than I had initially assumed. It involved the highest police ranks in the state and federal authorities, as well as the political elite. It concerned the black market for organs and the shadowy niche of human exhibits. Mark was just a part of a vast network that oversaw remote regions where it was easiest to procure material. These routes ran deep into the United Kingdom and the USA. The clients were overseas, influential, respectable figures closely tied to secret societies, the elite of show business, and the highest circles of politics. I relayed everything Jake had learned from Vince about Mark's drug network to Dan. Dan listened without interrupting, his face remaining calm. "Yeah, that's not a complicated story at all, Max," Dan said placidly. "The fact is, in every region, the local police oversee drug trafficking, and not just that. The illegal cigarette trade is also in their sphere of control. The chief of police is always at the center of such schemes." Dan told me I needed to go back to that den, which absolutely had to be exposed and shut down. He assured me it would be funded. Dan had an excellent memory, as I understood it. He remembered all the details and nuances of my story. He reminded me that I had already told the bar owners about my intention to film Kalgoorlie's nightlife, and this was a perfect pretext for returning. My sudden absence could be explained by an urgent assignment from another editorial office. Dan was sending his colleague Kyle with me. He was to come as our friend just for company, like a former classmate of Jake's and mine. This would allow Kyle to move freely and stay close. We needed to find out the location of the lab base and the drug storage base. We also needed to check Lloyd's property and his refrigerators. After talking with Dan, I returned home. About an hour later, the phone rang. It was Kyle we arranged to meet. In the morning, even before dawn, Kyle pulled up to my house. He was my age, about 30, but his gaze immediately betrayed a person who had seen more than most at that age. In him, I read calm confidence and a sharp, tenacious mind, hidden behind an external indifference. This guy clearly knew how to listen and not ask unnecessary questions. His humor was biting but not aggressive, and I liked that. We fit perfectly into a team. It was clear. We both understood without words what was required of us and were ready for the mission. Kyle and I arrived in Coolgardie afternoon. Jake met us on the cool veranda with cold beer. I introduced him to Kyle, explaining our cover story about being classmates. Jake said Harry had been asking about me. I explained to him that you had an urgent work trip and would soon return with a friend of ours, so there are no suspicions. We drank cold beer to cool down a bit from the long drive, showered, and then headed towards Tyndall's. The mining center revealed its abandoned side to us. Tailings and rusty structures stretched to the horizon, although in the distance, the lights of modern, active facilities were visible. Here, however, silence reigned over dozens of abandoned mines. Kyle took out his phone and dialed a number. "We're here," he said briefly into the receiver. After the call, Kyle turned to us. "A lead mining engineer will be here soon. He's new here, Jake. You probably don't know him because he lives in the dormitory on this territory, on a FIFO system. He understands the equipment I have in my trunk. It's specialized equipment, so we need a professional, and I don't know the first thing about it." On the horizon, a rising cloud of dust appeared, rapidly approaching us. An orange column obscured the road until the silhouette of a white Jeep emerged from the swirling mixture. The vehicle stopped beside us, and a tall, middle-aged man, dressed in work overalls, stepped out. "Greetings, I'm Neil," he introduced himself, shaking hands firmly. His gaze was calm and professional. "I've already done a bit of scouting. There are plenty of abandoned mines here, but some of them have noticeable access tracks. It's clear they're regularly used. There are a couple of specific places where we should head first. We can't cover the entire area at once, of course. It's too big. But I think together, we'll figure it out." Neil got into his car. "Follow me," he said. We followed him along a winding, well-worn track leading to mines with signs of activity. The path grew bumpier, snaking among old tailings and dilapidated structures. Finally, we stopped at the entrance to one of the mines. Silence reigned all around. "The tracks on the ground speak for themselves. This isn't abandoned," Neil stated. From Kyle's trunk, we retrieved a ground-penetrating radar, GPR, a thermal imager, and several gas analyzer sensors. Neil took the main GPR unit and quickly assembled it, while Kyle put together the antennas. "The GPR will allow us to see the structure of voids and tunnels underground," Neil explained. "We need to accurately map their location. We'll set up the gas analyzer sensors to detect any vapors. It will help us understand what's being produced or stored here, even through pores in the ground. And the thermal imager will help find heat vents or ventilation shafts if they're close to the surface." Activating the GPR, Neil moved towards the nearest collapse. He slowly advanced along the presumed boundaries of the mine. After a few minutes, a clear anomaly appeared on the screen, an artificially reinforced tunnel. "Here it is. Looks like the main entrance," the engineer nodded. Then he turned on the thermal imager, scanning the surface. A distinct heat signature appeared above one of the collapsed fissures. Neil asked Kyle to bring the gas analyzer closer to the anomaly. The device immediately beeped, showing an increased concentration of CO2. "This is most likely living quarters," the specialist concluded. A sharp, pungent smell drifted from underground, which Kyle immediately recognized. It was the distinct chemical aroma of methamphetamine mixed with the smell of acetone and ammonia. The gas analyzer confirmed the presence of volatile organic compounds characteristic of illicit production. "Looks like a meth lab," Kyle said quietly. Stepping back, Neil carefully studied the GPR data on his tablet. "The readings are quite clear," he stated. "The lab is located at a depth of approximately 10 to 15 meters underground. The dimensions, by all accounts, it's quite an extensive complex, about 20 by 30 meters, possibly with several offshoots. This isn't just a small spot, but an entire underground facility that's actively being used." We went back to the cars and headed for the second site. Neil led us along a well-worn track about half a kilometer from the first mine. At this spot, underground, there weren't just tunnels, but extensive chamber structures. "Looks like large compartments," Neil stated, voicing the instrument readings. "About 12 meters deep, 40 by 25 meters in size. Lots of individual rooms and corridors, unusual layout for a mine. One of these structures stood out with an unusual echo signal, indicating refrigeration equipment, and the thermal imager detected areas of reduced temperature. The gas analyzer registered the presence of formaldehyde, chlorine-containing reagents, ethers, and clear traces of protein decomposition. This is a medical laboratory," the engineer concluded, his voice growing more serious. "More likely a morgue. They're working with organic material here. Lots of organic material." "That's all we could find," Neil said, putting away his tablet. "There's no point in going any further." He waved his hand towards the horizon where the tall light masts of active enterprises flickered. "Those are active quarries over there. I drove around this restricted area, and only these two sites don't look abandoned. We need to get out of here before security finds us." We agreed and left the restricted zone. Outside the Enterprise territory, we warmly said goodbye to Neil, thanked him for his help, and drove off in different directions. He promised to send a detailed report of the findings to the relevant department by evening. Back home, we decided the day had been too exhausting for anything else. This evening was reserved for a BBQ and beer. We lit the grill in the backyard. While the meat sizzled and the cold beer pleasantly burned our throats, we discussed what we'd seen. Further actions depended on Dan's instructions. Until they arrived, we just relaxed. Around 8 p.m., someone honked at our gate. Jacob got up in surprise and headed towards it. He returned shortly, a smile playing on his face. "That was Lloyd," he announced. "He said he urgently needed to go to a friend's place in Kalgoorlie for 3 days and asked us to look after his property. This is a stroke of luck. Now we have a window to check out his place." Kyle pulled out his phone and, like a cat anticipating a fish, dialed a number. He informed Dan of the news. The neighbor would be gone for 3 days. This gave us an immediate opportunity to investigate his property, the hangar, the house, every corner. Huddled over the tablet, already quite tipsy from the delicious meat and beer, we observed Lloyd's property. The drone truly was professional. It was silent and gave a good picture in night vision. The apparatus flew around the house, the hangar, the yard. At one point, Kyle found something interesting and brought the drone back to the house. Through an open window, we saw 2 human silhouettes on a couch and a television on. This circumstance was very unsettling. Kyle flew the drone around the house even more carefully. A secluded corner inside the yard under a canopy revealed 2 cars. Jacob recognized Lloyd's car among them. We flew the drone closer and got a good look at the license plate of the second car. This could only mean one thing. The owner of the house wasn't alone. They suspected something, and we had fallen into some kind of check or trap. The questions piled up even more. Kyle went inside to talk to his boss. Returning, he reported, the car's license plate was registered to Superintendent Mark, and that was very serious indeed. We'd been spotted. Cameras had been installed at the mine where we were, and we hadn't detected them. Our actions hadn't gone unnoticed, and now we were suspected. Neil would have to explain himself somehow, but fortunately, we had a cover story that was actually true. I really was interested in the history of the Golden Mile from a professional standpoint, and I had a personal reason, my grandfather, who disappeared in that mine. We decided to wrap up our party and head to our bedrooms. The day had been difficult and long, full of surprises. We needed to get some sleep. It was hard to predict where this story would lead us. I fell into a deep sleep. Around 5 a.m., I woke up fresh and energetic and decided to go out onto the veranda. Jacob was already there drinking coffee. "Looks like our neighbors left," he said. I heard 2 cars drive past on the other side of the road, where there's another exit from Lloyd's house. Most likely them. I went to wake Kyle. It was still dark and even cold. Settled on the veranda, we drank steaming coffee. The idea of launching the drone came immediately. The thermal imager showed that the house was empty. The cars under the canopy were gone too. We could easily get in. The only thing that worried us was whether there were cameras installed, but we decided to risk it. We decided that Jacob would stay at home to monitor the access roads with the drone in case the owner returned. Kyle and I set off for the house. We wanted to get back before dawn. We literally had half an hour. In this area, besides Jake's and Lloyd's houses, there was no one else, so no one drives on these roads at such an early hour, but we still didn't want to catch the eye of some random passerby. Kyle grabbed a small bag, saying he had lockpicks for any kind of lock in there. We quickly jumped over the low fence and ran to the house. I illuminated the lock with my phone while Kyle picked it. After about 3 minutes, he was done. Everything was done neatly, quickly, cleanly. We went inside. The house smelled of coffee. It was clear that people had been there recently. We began to inspect the house perimeter. Taxidermied animals stood everywhere. Some of them, frankly, were terrifying when the light from my phone picked them out of the darkness. In the corridors, I noticed the heads of kangaroos and emus, whose eyes seemed too alive. Then I heard Kyle curse. "Ugh, what a pervert," he muttered. I followed his voice. Kyle was standing in what appeared to be the owner's bedroom. He was looking at an armchair by the bed, where a woman was sitting. She was incredibly real. At the sight of this, a cold sweat broke out on me. I froze, instinctively recoiling. This was not a living person, but not an ordinary taxidermy either, rather a terrifyingly realistic imitation. The woman was completely naked. Kyle reached out with trembling hands to make sure. His fingers touched cold, hard, but incredibly lifelike skin. I took several photos and videos. Disgust rose in my throat. We hastily left this branch of hell. Next was another room, an office. Kyle immediately sat down at the computer there and turned it on. After a bit of fiddling with the password, Kyle logged into the system. The first thing that caught his attention was the camera icon. It turned out the house was equipped with a video surveillance system. He clicked on the icon, and a program unfolded on the screen. Cameras were installed around the perimeter of the hangar, as well as in the front yard. After fast-forwarding the recording a bit, we saw ourselves. Here we were jumping over the low fence, and here we were entering the house. This was a huge stroke of luck. Kyle, well acquainted with such programs due to his line of work, quickly deleted these recordings. We exchanged glances. Risking going into the hangar and breaking in was unnecessary. What we had seen in the house was more than enough. Then he started studying the program to understand how we could exit without falling back into the camera's view. It turned out there was a certain blind route that the cameras didn't cover. My partner showed it to me on the monitor. After that, he inserted a flash drive and began uploading everything. Documents, folders, files. The entire computer migrated to the drive, copying Lloyd's life. We returned home as soon as it started to get light. Jacob listened with interest to our story about everything we had seen, about the creepy woman in the bedroom, about the taxidermied animals throughout the house, and also about the possibility that we had downloaded valuable information. Our suspicions were not unfounded. Now we had evidence that we had seen with our own eyes and documented on our phones. Kyle set the flash drive to transfer data. Soon Dan would have an idea of Lloyd's dealings. The next hour we spent studying the files copied from Lloyd's computer. The deeper we delved, the clearer we understood the scale of this organized network. Lloyd turned out to be not just a sadist, but a true monster. We scrolled through photos and videos that captured the entire disgusting process, from the moment still living people fell into his hands to the stages of turning them into taxidermied exhibits. Every image, every video was a testament to inhumane, brutal violence, going beyond all conceivable limits. We understood that all this video recording was intended not only for this bastard's personal use, but also for other depraved minds. Someone bought these terrifying exhibits, and someone else acquired these videos. It was an equally vile business. In the pile of downloaded documents, we discovered something even more shocking, a meticulously systematized card index. It was an impeccably organized accounting and medical registry that could have belonged to some legitimate clinic were it not for its content. The medical section was flawless. It listed all the victims. Each file contained photographs, detailed medical indicators, a list of organs removed, and their intended purpose. The financial section included a detailed price list for each organ. There were requests for individual organs, waiting list information, as well as data on buyers and their specific requests. This was an entire criminal system, documented with chilling precision. A section with personal dossiers was also found, compiled on everyone who was involved in this dirty business in one way or another. Among them were materials on all the police officers working under the superintendent. Detailed information, as well as personal data of their family members, was available for everyone involved in kidnapping tourists, drug trafficking, and delivering live goods to the mines. It became clear that this was used as a tool for blackmail or further intimidation. If someone dared to go against Mark, then, as the saying goes, they would go for disposal. Jacob identified 2 former drug-addicted police officers among them who had previously given him information about Mark's business. And then, bingo! Our hearts skipped a beat. Among the lists were 2 missing bloggers from Melbourne about whom Superintendent Mark had spoken on television screens. According to their files, these 2 were still alive. They had undergone a full medical analysis and requests for their organs had been sent out like auction lots for what could be extracted from them. We had to act fast before these people were dismembered. The federal scale of this father and son's activities was truly impressive. The black market for organ transplantation flourished excellently in our country. All major capital cities of Australia had at least 2 clinics where this business developed, plus several smaller cities that also had institutions ready to update any organ for medical tourists coming from all corners of the planet for a good fee. All the addresses of these clinics were now known, and the names of the surgeons too. This house of horrors had to be shut down. All those involved had to be brought to justice. When Dan finally called, his voice was full of rage about our intrusion into Lloyd's house, but gratitude peeked through the anger. Such aces up his sleeve were worth the risk. Without wasted words, Dan ordered us to get our asses in gear and scram to Perth as fast as possible. Without wasting a minute, we tossed our bags in the car and, flooring the pedal, sped west. Due to his work, Jacob knew the entire area and understood how to bypass federal highways and major roads. It was obvious that Mark could deploy any police department to intercept us. So, we moved along dirt roads, avoiding busy sections. We didn't need the fastest route, but one where a police cordon couldn't catch us. We arrived in Perth around 3 in the afternoon. Kyle dropped Jacob and me off at my house, then immediately headed to the office. All we could do was wait for his call about further developments. To avoid trouble, we didn't linger at my house. I called a friend living in Mandurah, and Jacob and I went to his place. We needed to lay low, as it would be nothing for Mark to track down my address. The day passed in agonizing anticipation of news. Kyle called closer tonight. The serious and organized crime squad, led by Dan, is starting a covert operation to free the Melbourne bloggers, he reported. Their rescue was a priority. We had to get them before they were put under the knife. The Tactical Response Group, TRG, is already halfway to Coolgardie. Simultaneously, an order was given to detain Lloyd and Mark pending investigation. Dan also promised that I would be the first to break this story to the media, since I was a direct participant in all the events. The right of the first night for this exclusive was mine. My heart pounded like before a bungee jump into an abyss. All we could do was pray to God that the Tactical Response Group would save the young couple. I, meanwhile, sat down to write my future report about all the events that had transpired. Around 2 in the morning, Kyle reported, "We successfully got them out," and it sounded like a victory cry. The guy and girl were rescued from that mine where, as we suspected, the underground clinic was located. The superintendent and his dad were detained. Searches are being conducted in the underground drug lab, the clinic, and Lloyd's and Mark's houses. If your preliminary report isn't ready yet, hurry up. Otherwise, this information will be hard to hold back. You can contact any news agency. We can give them an exclusive for the morning news. Time burned. I called my journalist mate at Channel 7. Their earliest news show, Sunrise, kicked off at 5 a.m. "Bill, I've got a bombshell that'll blow up your broadcast. Want an exclusive? Just give me some time to get my report ready, and you'll be first in line. I'm in Mandurah right now, and I need to hit the road immediately to make that first broadcast. Say yes, or I'm calling Vincent at Today on Channel 9. Bill knew I wouldn't disturb him at 2 in the morning for some trivial piece of info. We quickly sorted out how much time I'd need, and he promised me airtime. So, I wasted no time and headed straight to their news studio. Channel 7's morning program exploded across Australia. I stayed at the studio, appearing on several follow-up morning shows, constantly adding fresh details. Kyle kept me updated on the unfolding operation, and I fed that new info straight into my reports. This massive scandal had colossal consequences. For another 6 months, new cases kept surfacing. People involved were arrested, and more criminal schemes came to light. I was right in the thick of it, in high demand by every news agency, always holding the freshest information. Once the names of all the missing were released, and even more shockingly, the names of the organ recipients, people wanted blood. Society was utterly furious. Distraught relatives received only the taxidermied remains of their loved ones for burial. No sane person could fathom such a thing, and that was just for those whose bodies were found in Australia. Pinpointing the exact location of every body shipped overseas was almost impossible, but the scandal still went global. People worldwide were horrified to learn about the existence of such an inhuman business and about the bastards who ran it. Mass protests erupted across Australia. People demanded the abolition of the moratorium on the death penalty, and that Lloyd, Mark, and all the implicated black market surgeons be sentenced to the supreme penalty. Soon my first book, Golden Vein, will hit the shelves. Only 6 months ago, I never would have guessed that my assignment from a small publication, West Australian Traveller, to Coolgardie, where I went for a report on the nightlife in the Golden Mile, would spiral into something this massive, exposing so many festering sores in society, so much corruption and crime that no one could have even conceived of.